Hello, and welcome to Anansi's first virtual poetry bash. For those of you who don't know, I'm Kevin Connolly. I'm the editor of the Anansi Poetry imprint and also an Anansi poet. We'd love to be able to look at your wonderful faces in person, but that's not possible at the moment. So we've done what we think is the next best thing. We brought our poets to you live from their kitchens and couches and living rooms. So feel free to scrutinize their backgrounds in Zoom, where apparently it's not rude to stare. So this evening, we're celebrating the publication of 5 titles. First, 3 poets from our spring 2021 list proper, Bardia Sinaee and Mary Germaine's debut collections, and Anansi veteran Stephen Heighton's long overdue selected poems, 1983 to 2020. I should also mention that Steve's book was edited for the press by none other than Karen Soley. A little later, we have another debut of sorts, New Zealand poet Kate Camp's first book published in North America. Like Steve's, it's also a new and selected volume, plus our special A-list reissue of Nicole Brossard's classic Museum of Bone and Water, which was first published in English by Anansi in 2003. So to be clear, we're celebrating these books with the poets in 2 sets, with very brief readings followed by a Q&A to the writers from me or from my co-host Kayla Czaga, who I'll introduce in a moment. But I have a few points of order I have to run through first. House of Anansi respectfully acknowledges that the land on which we operate is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee. It's also situated in the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Our trusty bookseller for the night is Type Books Junction. Thank you, Type. We've also worked out with our beloved neighbor, Henderson Brewery, 2 value-added bundles with a kind of Sterling Road buy local theme. So our small bundle features Kate and Nicole's book and a trio of great craft beers from Henderson. That costs $40, which is less than what the books themselves would cost you on their own. The larger bundle features the books from the spring list proper, Bardia, Mary, and Stephen's collections, plus a jar of that great grainy mustard from the Drake Commissary, and some butter crackers from Spent Goods, which is a really interesting company, Google them, and the same trio of premium beers from Henderson's. And that goes for $80, which also makes the beer on us. So links to both the bookstore and the bundles will appear in the chat, feature several times during the event. Just a couple of other things. You'll know that there's, from the red light and left on your screen, this event is being recorded. So if you don't want your likenesses to live for whatever counts as forever on the cloud, maybe turn your cameras off. Also, if you don't need the closed captioning feature, you might see it now at the bottom of your screen, or you find it distracting while the reading goes on, click the CC button and you might be able to change your options. So all that said, in the words of another great poet, let's get this party started. Here with us to help me with running the event, live from her couch in Victoria, BC, is Anansi poet Kayla Czaga. Kayla's debut collection, For Your Safety, Please Hold On, won the 2015 Gerard Lampert Memorial Award for Best First Collection, and she was also shortlisted for the Governor General's Award. Her sophomore effort and her first book from Anansi, Dunk Tank, was a finalist for the BC Yukon Book Prize. So welcome, Kayla. Great to see you. Kayla is going to be your MC for the first set this evening. So take it away, Kayla.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that intro and for inviting me to co-host with you. It's an absolute honor to be here with Anansi to celebrate their fine new books. I'll be taking you through the first 3 readings of the evening from Bardia Sinaee, Mary Germaine, and Stephen Heighton, and then we'll have a short question and answer period with these authors. Our first reader, Bardia Sinaee, was born in Tehran, Iran, and currently lives in Toronto. He is the author of the chapbooks Blue Night Express and Salamander Festival. His poems have appeared in magazines across Canada and in several editions of Best Canadian Poetry. He holds an MFA from the University of Guelph, where he was nominated for the Governor General's Gold Medal. The acclaimed American poet Srikanth Reddy, who earlier this month made the Griffin Prize's international shortlist, had this to say about Bardia's debut collection, Intruder. Haunted by the political history of the Middle East, by the precarity of the Canadian metropole, and by the specter of death, this existential intruder questions just about everything, including himself. Wondrously, Sinaee's lyric interrogation hold us captive, even as they invite us to imagine our escape. Welcome, Bardia.
Hi, it's nice to see you. I'm going to read 2 poems from Intruder. This first poem is called Band-Aid. You pulled my hair because you care. Suffering won't make me beautiful like the people buying menthol chest rub at the pharmacy, or the trees that drop used Band-Aids everywhere, then feign death for a season. I grind my teeth, not knowing what to say to you. I go through the bargain bin and eat what's left in there for lunch. Thorn oil for my ruptured cyst and beauty cream for ugliness. Does aspirin make you think of me? I'm standing in the skincare aisle, remembering our trip to Montreal, how, laughing uncontrollably, you opened the bathroom door on your face. The pharmacist was taken with your bruise. She pulled you near to ask if I had hurt you. This second and last poem is called Transfusion. I walk most days before dinner now that the air is finally calm and clear, and each time the horizon admits more of the visible world. The windowsills are lined with potted herbs. A fleet of rental toilets is converging on the park where blue squills bloom like dye in water. Welcome to the party, an ache in my head I could crawl up into, abetted by spring rot. Curious provisional sprouts betray the dreaded taproot, but I'll clear the yard for pole beans and baby beets, keen as the sun-made girl, oh spring, if you promise me more light and good, clean blood. Thank you.
Thank you, Bardia. Our next reader, Mary Germaine, is a poet, an educator, and a PhD student at the University of New Brunswick. Her poems have appeared in the Walrus magazine, Riddle Fence, The Art Sci Effect, and Augur. Her debut collection marvels at the beauty of the world while simultaneously laughing at the absurdity of it all. These poems scroll from a shrine in Lourdes to an augmented reality sandbox, from a mall filled with loitering ex-love interests to a fairy tale ending where all the men turn out to be chairs. Formally attentive and inventive, imaginative and genuine, congratulations, Rhododendrons showcases a new and necessary poetic voice. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much, Kayla. I'm going to read 2 poems. The first one is called Some History of This. If properly wound, the robot friar will pace and kiss his cross and clatter out a mea culpa. Then again pace, then kiss. Between an institution and a cliche, there's a narrow kitchenette where a loose tooth and a hulking California strawberry try to reinvent the kiss. As if to prove nothing changes, we talk nose to nose, and every word marks a new halfway point in a race to an infinitely distant kiss. How do we forgive the guy who's out there on Locust Day, waiting to film the last shaft of wheat that a rainbow will bend to kiss? Tonight's a drag, thinks the bartender, dumping ice melt from half-empty cups. The sink's littered with lemon husks and more than one iridescently drowned kiss. The price of barrels, bobs, and sinks. But a vending machine in Niagara Falls will still make a souvenir tightrope with an American dollar and your honest kiss. lots of closets, and the view was stellar. We happily gave our first and last and lived the best we could afford inside a rented kiss. Coda in blue. A long line of X's and O's I smeared under my name so you won't forget what you're bound to miss. Or not. The glass we jokingly pressed to our lips. It can only shatter once. This is the handful of blood that the skin puckers to make a permanent kiss. And the second poem I'm going to read takes its title from a quote by Maya Angelou, and it's called Life Loves the Liver of It. Life loves the liver of it, she says. Life loves the spleen, tickles or Heimlichs the esophagus according to its need. Life loves a shivering kidney with a split-second hot stun. Life loves the lungs, their broad and leafy hurry, their wet night rattle and one hollow note from behind a false wall, sounding to let you know there's a secret passageway beside you in the soggy bed. Life loves the heart as you love traffic and weather every 10 minutes on the Thames, and its affection for the stomach is obvious. See how life waves madly whenever you board the bus. The obedient stomach waves back. But the favorite's always been the liver. Life loves it without ego, without trapezing its fabulous 500 vital functions. We know, we know. Who said life was fair? Not the nerves, all of them, strung along the swift and dip of a too bright day. Don't you love a hardback chair after working 12 hours on your feet? Use a plate if you're making a sandwich, please. Come to the table. Listen. Bring the bottle we were gifted earlier. It supplies its own tonic, don't worry. And don't you start ragging on me. I feel just fine. Life will always look after me and my liver, and I'll tell you why. It has to. Life needs to rest some time in the liver's fine-grained seat. Jealousy, wrath, and greed. The heart can't take it. The stomach drops to its knees. Luckily, nothing is stronger than a sucker, and the liver is always ready. If life tears at you and smarts, if, say, a lunch guest has talons and vicious snooze, and your lungs wither and crumble apart, don't worry. The liver may wince at the bitterness, but tomorrow it'll grow back for more. Thank you so much, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. Our next reader needs no introduction, but since this is a celebration, I will introduce him anyway. Stephen Heighton is the author of 6 previous collections of poetry, including The Waking Comes Late, which won the 2016 Governor General's Award for Poetry, and Stalin's Carnival, the 1990 Gerald Lampert Memorial Award winner. He's also authored, to great acclaim, 4 novels, 3 short story collections, and a memoir. His fiction and poetry have been translated into 10 languages and have received 4 Gold National Medal Awards. His 2020 memoir, Reaching Mathemna, was a finalist for the Hillary Weston Prize for Nonfiction from the Writers' Trust. His poetry is marked by its grace of language, its musicality, and its forthright treatment of human emotion. This gorgeous selected poems, which spans more than 3 decades and includes a selection of brand new poems, is an absolute feast for the reader. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Kayla. I'm going to attempt to give you a sort of flash tour through the 4 decades that are represented in this selected poems volume, starting in 1983 with a time when I was traveling a lot, hitchhiking with a guitar and a backpack. This poem actually comes out of a dream, bad dream about hitchhiking, and it's called Nightmare. And by the way, the poem ends with a comma, something that has caused editorial problems for the poem and for me for 37 years. Nightmare. I will be standing on the verge of a plain by a highway no one else has taken. Flat dance of the skyline, skin burned by a treeless sun, somewhere the roar of an ocean, or a silver car that slows and stops, a door that swings, and I must choose on the verge of the plain. And though it is hard to see through the layering dust, I believe I hoist my pack and pull it after me into that car. Moving on to the 1990s, a poem called An Elegy Years After Sarah, which concerns glow stars, those little stars you can put on children's ceilings to map the heavens. So her ceiling, a map of stars. First time we made love, late afternoon, late winter, and after as she slept, how her room fogged up with dusk, and paper stars she'd stuck up there in childhood came out in strange constellations, and I missed the earth, till her room was night, her breath deepening, the stars cooling down. I said, come closer, and her eyes, half open, flashing back whatever light there was, went out. Now moving on to the 2000s, a poem that's going to touch a bit on Bardia Sinaee's Pharmacy and on Mary Germaine's life. It's called Life, followed by an exclamation mark, as the word should always be. It's an approximation of a poem by Miltos Sanctuaris, the Greek poet. Night in the all-night drug mart, where a kneeling horse devours the vinyl tile, and a woman with curious vernal burns is being treated urgently, while the ghost despairingly weeps by the magazines. And I'll finish with another very short poem from the 2010s or 2010s. A poem, it's a small, very slight poem really, but it's exultant and affirmative in a way that not a lot of my poems are. So I want to finish with this one. It's called Night Skaters, Skeleton Park. Puck pummels the boards, Arister rings the crossbar, whispers in netting, razoring stride, shave up crystal grit. Plays unwitnessed score their own applause. Mister, it's like making the finals, only finer. Mosaic, ice freeze, fresco, the scratched and crosshatched drafts of a poem. Rink lights fade, but your blades grind on, plying tunes from the grooves, like needles do on white-hot vinyl. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen, for that reading. So that concludes the first set of readings. Now I'd like to ask Bardia, Mary, and Stephen a couple of questions. My first question is for debut authors Bardia and Mary. Both of your collections have very distinct and unique voices, as we just heard from your readings. For the emerging writers who might be joining in our audience, do you have any advice for finding or developing a voice? What was that journey like for both of you? Were there any things that helped you out along the way?
Should I begin?
Please.
Thanks. I would say, I think there was someone who said it, I think it was Dean Young, who said, try to imitate the people you like and you'll fall short, and where you land that's where your voice is. So I tried to copy people, including many of the people who are in the audience right now, including you, Kayla, and including my editor, Kevin. And I always fell short, and wherever I landed, that's where my voice was. So that's how I did it.
Great answer. Thanks, Bardia. Mary.
Yeah, that's so nice, Bardia. I never thought about voice really in my own right. So I don't have very good advice because I didn't start thinking about it until very recently, where I started reading more. I guess what I did is read as widely as I can. That is my advice. Even the stuff that you hate. And then your voice will kind of mash up or come through that. But I didn't even really think about it until lately. I've been reading other people's poems about flowers, and I think, does that sound like me? So it's really making me anxious, actually. Should have been thinking about voice earlier.
When I read your collection, I got a really strong sense of voice, and it was lovely.
Okay.
Thank you both for those wonderful answers. Emerging writers, take note. Beautiful. And my next question is for Stephen Heighton. I'm just a bit curious what your process was like for selecting the poems in your selected, how you approached that task, and what was it like going back to your early work?
I think some poets are eager to, they choose to do the triage themselves and go back into the early work. I never had any confidence that I could do that properly. I mean, I find it hard enough to know what lines are good and bad after 35 or however many years. In a new poem, I find it hard enough to know what's good and what's bad, even a month into it. So I knew I'd have a lot of problems judging poems from 35 years ago. Because you develop emotional attachments to certain poems, and also you undervalue other poems that may have virtues you're not aware of. So I was really glad Anansi brought in Karen Soley, who's, as you know, a fantastic poet and a really good editor, as I discovered. And Kevin Connolly helped as well. Just tell you really briefly, what Karen did was she made a yes, maybe, and no list. And I went through my poems as well and gave some thought to it. And I found there were a few cases where I really wanted a poem in there, and she just said no. And I trusted her when she did that. Well, she really didn't like it because I just could not be sure that I wasn't just emotionally attached for some reason to that poem. But that didn't happen often. Usually, if I really liked a poem, it was at least on her maybe list or on her yes list. And if I really hated a poem, it was usually on her no or maybe list. Once in a while, she really liked one that I'd said no to, and then I trusted her because I figured there's probably something there in a poem from 30 years ago that I can't see, and I trust her acumen, so I would say yes. It was a great experience. It was difficult, but it was great working with them.
Maybe just a brief follow-up. Were there any of your collections that were especially hard for you and Karen to choose from?
There were some of my collections that were especially hard for me to reread. And by the way, I just want to say I tweaked poems I hated. There were words I hated. I did not violate the spirit of any poem or the shape of any poem, but I felt no compunction about cutting a word or changing a word I hated, because you know what life is like. You don't often get to go back and correct mistakes. You never do. So when life offers you this opportunity to get something right 30 years later, I say take it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Stephen, and thank you, all three of you, Bardia, Mary, and Stephen, for your readings. I urge you in the audience to go out and buy these very excellent books. They're really not wrong when they say Anansi publishes very good books. And it's now my pleasure to pass the imaginary microphone back to Kevin, who will be taking you through the second half of tonight's reading.
Hi. Thanks, Kayla. Thanks, Mary and Bardia and Stephen, for such lovely readings. We're all here at a kind of blessed events for these three poets. I remember the first time I could hold my first book in my hand, and it was one of the top 5 days of my life to that point. And Steve should have had the selected poems out a while back, so it's a nice milestone to achieve after working so well and so hard for so many years. I'll just remind you that Type Books has signed copies and signed book plates of all 3 of these books, and has all 5 books for sale. And if you want to add a little luster to your lockdown lifestyle, then the Henderson Brewery bar bundles are available too. So as the kids say, check the chat. Okay, we're moving to our final 2 readers of the evening. So here with us via the miracle of satellite and fiber optics is distinguished Kiwi poet Kate Camp. And in another minor miracle, if you look over Kate's shoulder, you'll also be able to see what tomorrow morning looks like in Wellington, New Zealand. Is it tomorrow for us or yesterday for them? Discuss amongst yourselves. Kate's the author of 6 previous collections of poetry, and she's the recipient of pretty much all of New Zealand's major literary awards. She's recognized as a leading voice of her generation, widely anthologized and studied, and she's cited as an influence by many of New Zealand's younger poets. How to Be Happy Though Human was published this past September, simultaneously by the House of Anansi in North America, and in New Zealand by University of Victoria Press. I was able to go to a launch there at about 1 a.m. our time and ask her a few questions then, but we haven't been able to give her the attention we'd like to because pandemic. So it's so great to have her here from so many time zones away today. Of Kate's work, the noted poet and critic Stephanie Burt has this to say. She is patient with the world and with its seagulls, attentive to the injustice and kindness and the frustration we can share with one another if we're lucky. Here is the so-called outside world, and here is its wonderfully sensitive, understated poet, absolutely fluent, yet somewhat on fire. Hi, Kate. Welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. Kia ora, yeah, nice to see people. Ngā mihi ki te whenua, ngā mihi ki ngā tupuna. Greetings to the land and to the ancestors over there. I'm going to start reading the title poem of the book. The only thing I want to say is that the word morning that appears towards the end of the poem is morning with a U. How to be happy, though human. From the circle, there was a man we couldn't see, just his fingers held out for emphasis, like the hands of a preacher or a primary school teacher. Before that, we'd been at the film where 3 people taxidermied a baby zebra, caught in the moment of standing for the first time. I go back to the wings of my school's assembly hall, smell of dust and afternoons. We are hiding from folk dancing, which we love. And I go back to Saturday. We dance with other people, other people's children, create community with physics. Memory is a kind of mourning. We take each other's hands as if they were made for that, and we form a circle. This book came out pre-pandemic, was all signed off before that, but you're probably all experiencing the phenomenon where everything sort of seems strangely pandemic influenced. And when I read that about taking people's hands, I certainly feel that. This is Panic Button. Tisyata tells me that the Bedouin hardly drink any water. They bury onions in the desert, she says, though I'm not sure if the two are connected. So many things can go wrong inside a human life. It's almost comical. You find yourself in a house in a night with everyone you love breathing in and out somewhere. And if you thought about it properly, you'd just throw up in terror. Instead, I have this button in my pocket, not like a panic button, just a button that's come loose, and it fits into the curve of my thumb and finger as I turn it over and over. I keep it in my pocket like you keep a pebble in your mouth in the desert to make saliva flow. And a little bit like Stephen, I kind of wanted to end on a note that's a little more positive. This is a poem from quite a long time ago, and it remembers a good party night. Guests. You left behind a crown of flowers, a hair clip with teeth like claws, and a red wine stain resembling the Qantas sign. When it seemed to me the sky was getting violet, I tried to hide the clock. No matter, its face was dark and its menacing tick hidden by music. And so, yo-ho, we were not as drunk as sailors, but kept our watch from the sofa, which swam through the night like a boat. And when you left, you were 2 dark heads below the balcony. You were underneath the white sign of a taxi, and I was one, delighted, with dozens of glasses in front of me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate, for that lovely reading, and great to see you in tomorrow afternoon. It's now my great pleasure and honor to introduce Quebecois writer extraordinaire and Canadian literary treasure from her house in Montreal, Nicole Brossard. Madame Brossard has been a force in Quebecois and Canadian letters since the publication of her first collection, Aube à la Saison, in 1965. Among the many honors she has received for the dozens of volumes of fiction and poetry she has published since then are 6, count them, nominations for the Governor General's Literary Award, an honor she has received twice, and a 2008 appearance on the shortlist of the Griffin Poetry Prize. In June 2019, Brossard received the Griffin Trust Lifetime Recognition Award at the Griffin Gala. Anyone who was there last night will vouch for what an overwhelmingly popular decision that was. The English language edition of Museum of Bone and Water was first published by the House of Anansi in 2003. I think it was published in French in 1999. The special A-list edition, just released April 7th, contains a new introduction from its esteemed translators, Aaron Murray and Robert Maisels. The Quill and Choir had this to say about this book when it came out. Here, the central metaphor is the human body, the bone and water of which our bodies are composed. In Brossard's work, the body becomes a museum, a repository of our history in the broadest sense of the word, physical, psychological, and cultural, past, present, and future. So now Nicole will treat us to a few glimpses from her museum. Welcome, Nicole Brassard.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Anansi. I will read one poem, which is titled "The Present is Not a Book." Because of the body, the present, every day, landscapes are that place in my eyes where women and other women touch memory and pleasure. Because of ends of the line of time that runs through our air, most of us dedicate our poems, life, to girls capable of tongues and future. Amid mirrors and screens, a way to approach silence, palm trees of Dublin or Key West, and other images where the rain seems infinite, a care for water that feels good as life because of the body seeks conversation, others say culture here. Because of words gone off on the web, of life in the mouth of June that watches over the present from one shore to the other, the palm trees on the Isle of Man, dogs haunted like museum prose, I squint my eyes wisely. To the best of my knowledge, I observe why everywhere ideas are dying head-on in our topical faces, our bodies personalized like perfumes, yet in the here and now, palm trees remain in the night inexhaustibly green, so languorous that no question. Because of the body, the meaning of life constantly changes vertigo. For if the ocean were at the far end of destiny, spark of green, delicate work of presence, intended for a normal humanity, the future and the future would run together. Yet the present comes swiftly, with each phrase a new configuration of meaning where no one hesitates in thoughts, in rapture. The present is not a book, but joy that traverses the rose bushes. And just one very brief poem. Tonight If you lean your face close and civilization stretches out at the end of your arms, tonight, if in the full flight you catch my image, say it was from afar, like a die in the night. Thank you. Je n'entends plus rien.
Thank you both. Takes a little while to choreograph the three people on screen at once, but it's such a pleasure to listen to both of your words from so many different time zones away. This is one of the good things maybe about having to live virtually for a little, because it would have been awfully hard, awfully expensive, and with a terrifying carbon footprint to bring us together in person to have me ask you two questions. First, I'm going to ask a question for both of you. Writers understand solitude more than most. They even crave it sometimes because it's a necessary precondition for their work. But during the pandemic here, solitude seems to have morphed into something closer to isolation. And I was wondering if there was anything that had jumped out or surprised you about that condition, solitude, over the last year, or perhaps simply made more clear. And I'll start with you, Nicole.
Well, I have the impression that solitude has made a synthesis of isolation, and they got mixed up together. They got mixed up also in terms of a shift of civilization. I think we were on the move for a change of civilization, but we got pushed in the back so we could enter really or feel what it will feel to be in that new civilization. And so for many moments, I felt I could still use very, very properly my solitude, but sometimes I felt it was heavy, like a sword of Damocles over our head. Yes.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it dovetails with some thoughts I've shared with friends over the course of this, that as awful as it is, nobody really wants to go back to the previous normal. There's a sense of change going on that seems like real change at the same time as all this pandemic is going on, all this terrible stuff is happening. Kate, your experience of the pandemic, given your country's island status and very low infection numbers, at least it appears from a distance, it's been different than the rest of the world, it seems. But have you been forced to think about these kinds of things as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think New Zealanders have got a bit of a sense of survivor when we look at the rest of the world, because we went into a very strict lockdown for about 7 weeks this time last year, where everyone in the country, 5 million of us, had to stay home and not leave your house, which felt very strange. But then it was over, and we've been COVID-free since then with our borders closed. So we've had a couple of little tiny incursions, but while the rest of the world has been on the endless Zoom meetings and suffering, you know, missing the relatives. I mean, after even that couple of months, to be able to see people and hold people who I hadn't seen for that time, it was amazing, the emotional release. So I can only, I just can't imagine what it must be like to be coming up, you know, the other side of a year of it. So I think we've been in a very unusual situation. For me, I'm a very gregarious person and I love to be seeing people all the time. And so for me, solitude is not normally a condition much of my life, but actually when I have it, like when I've been on writing fellowships in countries where I didn't know anyone, or at the moment I've been 3 months on sabbatical here at our beach house, we call it in New Zealand, our batch. Living alone, and I absolutely love it. And then I almost feel the experience of other people as an intrusion when I've got used to having that solitude. So I always surprise myself as someone who's so sociable at how quickly I can become a hermit.
Yeah, I'm more of a hermit by nature and an opt-outer. I can think of the many times I could have gone out to do something or see something, and then I chose to stay in and read a book instead. And there's something very frustrating about being told by life that you can't do it, even if you weren't likely to do it in the first place. Staying with you, Kate, your poetry makes a place for humor more so than most so-called serious poetry. Can you talk a little bit about the role of humor in your work and how that's changed over the years?
Yeah, I think probably from my very earliest influences as a child growing up, one of the books of poetry I had was a book of children's poetry by Roger McGough and Michael Rosen called You Tell Me. And it had a lot of comic poems in it. They were mainly comic poems because they were for children. And so I think from a really early age, I had a sense of how humor and poetry could be, that it had a place, but also how it could complicate things and how it could create a sense of sort of double meaning and of the sort of the ground falling away under you as you realize, one of the poems in it was something like, cousin John wanted to be, dreamed that he would kiss a frog and become a handsome prince. Instead, he turned into a frogman and was last seen in a sewage pipe somewhere near Gravesend. And, encountering that as like a 7-year-old, it was this sense of not only that humor had a place, but that it could sort of surprise and create an underworld in the poem. And I suppose as my career's developed, that's become, I think in my early poems, I probably used humor often as a way to diffuse tension and not be too self-serious, because in New Zealand, that's like a capital offence. The worst thing you can do in New Zealand culture is to take yourself seriously. And so I probably used it to diffuse some of that tension early on, whereas now I like to use it. Now I just see it's such an integral part of the tension, and sometimes it can be, sometimes the most disturbing part of the poem or the most honest part of the poem can also be a laugh line. I find sometimes the humor in my poetry can be quite angry or filled with despair. And I love that.
Yeah, humor is complicated, definitely. Nicole, having read both your poetry and your fiction, I wonder if you'd talk about the different opportunities each genre provides for the writer. Are they different muscles for you, or are they just different manifestations of the same impulse? Like, why does something become a poem and not a novel or a piece of fiction?
Indeed, it is a great mystery. I think of a quotation from the poet René Daumal, the French poet, and he says, poetry does something to you. Prose says something to you. And when he says does something to you, it means that it goes and research in yourself, and you have to open as well to offer what is the most intimate and at the same time probably the most the greatest intuition that you have of your relation with the universe, with the cosmos in a certain way, and the language also in which you insert your consciousness. Of course, I feel much closer to poetry. I think it's my privileged way to relate to the universe, to relate to language, to relate to life, to relate to reality as well. Prose is there, and sometimes it comes and it haunts me. And it's one thing which is very interesting at the same time is that you cannot hide. If poetry wants to be there, it will be there. If prose wants to occupy some of your mental space, it will. And sometimes it might do it for a long time, maybe 3 years, 5 years. And so, of course, I've said that I write novels every once in a while, but it's each novel that I write is really to try to understand the world around me. Poetry is an intuition and a kind of certitude which can explode, but it is still always the most precious certitude for myself.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Kate. Great talking to you. We could talk for hours, but we don't have time to do that. Thanks for all of our readers today. Kayla's coming back. I'm following my script badly at the moment. Hold on a second. Why am I missing my page? Hold on. Yeah. All right, hold on. Anyway, we're here at the end of the evening. I want to thank you all for being there. Sorry for making my major boot right at the end. Check the chat for your, Kayla, do you have my script?
I have your script, yes.
Thank God we did this in advance. Can you
Absolutely.
read
Yes,
the
sorry.
thank you at the end?
So I guess first we'd like to thank you, the audience, for lending your time and virtual presence, and we're reminding everyone to go to Type Books and support these poets, or buy one of the value-added bundles put together by our friends and neighbors at Henderson Brewery and the Drake Commissary on Sterling Road. For the work required to hone the words in these poems, all credit goes to the writers. But making books is a collective effort, and with that in mind, and knowing, Kevin knowing, he might miss someone important, he and I would like to thank Maria Golikova, Alyssa Suchuk, and Laura Brady, Peter Norman, Jill Adamson, Karen Brochu, Laura Chapnick, and Zoe Kelsey, Debbie DeGroot, Jam and Mike, and Kristen Brassard, Matt Williams, and Joshua Greenspan. For help on this event, particularly Mark Luck and Maggie Barton-Baird, and of course, Anansi's poetry-loving owners and champions, Scott and Christine Griffin.
Yeah, I just found it the minute you started speaking, but you did a much better job than I would have. So thanks so much. I think Scott would kill me if I didn't mention that the national finals of the Poetry and Voice competition happens on Thursday night, April 22nd. You can sign up and watch that extremely positive event by clicking on poetryandvoice.com, and it should be relatively self-evident how to go from there. So I'd highly recommend that. It's one of the most fun evenings you can have, whether it's in person or virtual. I think this is the second straight year it's had to be that virtual. So thank each one of you for coming, and thanks to all the readers and the writers and the hosts, and to Kayla. And I wanted to finish the night with a toast. So grab whatever adult beverage you favor, or a kombucha, or an Ovaltine, or plain old H2O. And let's toast the poets we've heard tonight. Let's toast spring. And let's toast the hope that we can do all this in person next year. Always merry and bright. Good night.
Take care.